The Silver Sword, Chapter 20. The Burgomaster. Kurt Wolff's farm was high up in the Bavarian hills, not very far from the Czechoslovak border. The hills were thickly wooded right to the top, and between them the river Falcon came racing and twisting down on its way to join the Danube. A road passed through the field at the foot of the farm, northwards towards Berlin, southwards to the plains beyond the Danube. A few miles downstream was the village of Boding, where each day the burgomaster received his unwelcome orders from the American troops stationed there. He was a tall, thin man in late middle age, a scientist and social democrat who had lived in retirement from the rise of the Nazis in 1933 till the Americans fished him out some months back. He was shrewd and conscientious in a rather stupid way, but the anti-fraternisation laws had soured him. He thought that Germans who were willing to cooperate with the Americans should be treated as friends, not enemies. As go-between for his own people and the occupying power, he was answerable to both and invariably received more kicks than praise. In the eyes of the family, he was the devil himself. His present instructions were to round up all Polish and Ukrainian refugees in the area and dispatch them home in the American lorries provided. Most of them, and there were a considerable number lurking in the hills and villages, were only too glad to be going home. But there were some who, like the family, had their reasons for not returning. It was up to them to keep clear of him, for orders were orders and must not be disobeyed. So the farmer had offered to keep the family with him until the scare was over. They were only too pleased to accept, for they had quickly found that however much thunder there might be in his words, there was little in his heart, and his wife cared for them as if they were her own family. Jan, whom the farmer always referred to as the ex-convict, was particularly happy. He said that life on the farm was every bit as good as his week in prison. This he regarded as an achievement, and Ruth had quite failed to shake his pride in it. He made friends with an elderly and languishing mongrel dog named Ludwig. Until his arrival it had lain dopily in the sun all day, resenting any attention shown to it. To anyone who did not know Jan, the vitality and devotion which he managed to coax out of this half-dead creature was astonishing. It followed him all over the farm, wherever he happened to be working. He worked hard and with enjoyment. Nevertheless, like the others, when the lorries of cheering, home-going refugees swept up the road each evening, he was careful to keep out of sight. He, too, was afraid of the shadow of the burgomaster. Once the burgomaster paid a surprise visit, but the noise of his jeep rattling up the drive was warning enough, and they managed to reach the attic just in time. They lay there in the dust, all four of them, till he'd gone. To their annoyance, the attic window was blocked up, and they failed to get a peep at him. Later, when they were down in the parlour, Jan pointed to a man's photo on the mantelpiece and said, "Does the burgomaster look like that?" "Oh, no," said Frau Wolff. "He's not as handsome or as young as that." "Would he shoot us if he found us here?" said Bronya. "He'd be more likely to shoot me for hiding you here," said the farmer, "but he's such a poor shot he'd probably hit you by mistake. Of course our friend the ex-convict is the one he ought to shoot." "Let's talk about something more cheerful," said Ruth. She was admiring the smiling face of the young man in the photograph, and she asked who it was. "That's my elder son," said Frau Wolff, without looking up from her knitting. "Father took the photo on his last leave before he went overseas." "You never told us you had any children," said Edek. "We haven't," said Frau Wolff. "Hans was killed in the desert at a place called Tobruk. Rudolf, he's in the other photo, standing at the back in uniform. Rudolf died later, fighting to keep the Russians out of Warsaw." "You mean he was in General Model's army?" said Edek. "Yes." "We might have seen him," said Jan, who was peering intently at the figure in the photo. "They all wore uniforms like that. They used to hide in the ruins and take pot shots at us if we dared to come out of our rabbit holes. We hated them." "I liked them," said Bronya. "They used to give me sweets." "That was the Russians. You've got the wrong army," said Jan. "Some of the Germans were nice," said Ruth, "especially in the early days of the war." Jan looked at Frau Wolff, quietly intent on her knitting, and then at the farmer, whose eyes had a gleam of sadness he hadn't seen before, then back at the photo. That there could be any connection between these homely folk and the soldier in the photo was beyond his understanding. After a moment, he turned to the farmer and said, "You and I ought to be deadly enemies." The only deadly enemy you have, said the farmer, is the burgomaster, and even he hasn't given you much cause for complaint as yet. You wouldn't have hated Rudolf, Jan, said Frau Wolf. How do you know? Because he loved Ludwig in the same way that you do. He trained him to be the best watchdog we ever had. He pined away when Rudolf was called up, but now that you've come, he's almost as fit as he used to be. You're like Rudolf in other ways too. Oh, said Jan. He was sent to Warsaw to kill us, said Ruth. I don't suppose he wanted to very much. If he were here now, he would treat us as friends, as you do, Frau Wolf. It all seems so stupid and senseless. You'd like to be our mother, wouldn't you, Frau Wolf? Said Bronja. Yes, my dear, I would. I'd like to have you all, but you've got your own mother, and the most we can do for you is to try and help you find her. She turned to Jan. You have no mother, Jan. Would you like to stay here? Yes, I would, because of Ludwig, but I'd rather go with Ruth. Anyway, the sword wouldn't let me stay here, however much I wanted to. What sword? Said Frau Wolf. Having mentioned the sword, there was nothing for it but to go and fetch it from his treasure box. It's beautifully made, said Frau Wolf. Where did you get it? He told her how Josef Balicki had given it to him long ago, how Ruth had discovered it, how it had been ever since a pledge that Josef was still alive and waiting for them, how, when their spirits flagged, it gave them hope and inspired them to go on. Then he put it on the mantelpiece beside the photo of Rudolf, and a shaft of sunshine from the window caught it and made the silver blade sparkle. Next day, Edek and the ex-convict were stooking hay together when a jeep swept past on the road, throwing up a cloud of dust behind it. It was travelling twice as fast as it should have been, and had just vanished behind a clump of trees when there was a loud explosion, a grinding of gears, a yell, and then silence. Must have hit a tree, said Jan. It's a tyre burst, said Edek. Come on, we'd better go and help. Someone called out. He may be hurt. No, you don't know who it may be. Edek, come back. But Edek was halfway across the field already. He ran through the copse and found the car between two trees, at right angles to the road. The windscreen was cracked, and a middle-aged man was fumbling with one hand at the door catch, with the other wiping blood from his forehead. Tyre burst, he said as he stumbled out. Flung me right off the road. He knelt down by the front wheel. Covers ripped right through. Are you all right? Said Edek in German. Yes, yes. Have you got a handkerchief? This one's getting rather messy. Afraid I haven't, said Edek. Never mind, I'll manage with this. The cut was not deep, and after a minute or two the blood was flowing more slowly. Together they checked the jeep for damage. Apart from the burst tyre and cracks in the corner of the windscreen where it had struck a branch, there was nothing else. Today of all days, when I'm in such a hurry, the man exclaimed. I'll help you change the wheel, said Edek. Anxious to help, Edek forgot to be suspicious, and he set to work with the brace to unfasten the spare wheel, while the man, his handkerchief pressed to his forehead, stood by and watched. Out of the corner of his eye, Edek stole a glance at him, and knew at once it was the burgomaster. The thought didn't worry him unduly, for his German was sound enough to pass most tests. Working for Kurt Wolf? The man asked. Yes, he takes on extra help at this time of year. I thought all his refugees had gone. Edek started to cough. The effort to lift the spare wheel from its casing was too strenuous. The man threw down his blood-soaked handkerchief and heaved off the wheel. You take a rest, he said. Just then Ludwig turned up, and that meant that Jan was somewhere around. Wagging his tail, he licked Edek's hand. While the man was jacking up the damaged wheel, Edek felt something drop at his feet, an acorn. He looked up and saw Jan high up in the leafy branches making frantic signs to him. Where do you come from? The man asked as he unscrewed the nuts. The north. Oh, I took you for a refugee. Can you give me a hand with the spare? I seem to have wrenched my arm a bit. Edek tried, but the effort made him cough again. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked you. What about the lad up the tree? Would he give a hand? Edek was taken aback. Someone up in the tree? He said lamely, and then added, It's my brother. Come down, Franz. But Jan, who thought the man had not noticed him, was most reluctant to come down. Come down and lend a hand, Franz, Edek shouted, then explained to the man, I'm afraid Franz is a bit deaf. This time Jan came down. So you came from the north, Franz, said the man in a loud voice, and when Jan did not reply, he added, Seems to be dumb as well. Yes, said Edek, making a sign to Jan. Jan took his cue, acting blank and stupid while he helped the man heave the spare wheel on. Edek thought he was overdoing it with his vacant looks and gurgling noises, but the man didn't seem to notice anything unusual. The wheel was on and the man was ready to drive off. Edek was congratulating himself on their success when suddenly Bronya arrived on the scene and spoke to them in Polish. Edek tried to cover it up by replying in German. He was surprised that the man still took no notice. Switching the engine on, the man thanked the boys profusely for their help, backed the jeep onto the road and drove off. "You're a couple of worm-eaten lunatics," said Jan feelingly. "What did you want to climb that tree for?" said Edek. "To warn you it was the burgomaster. I knew that. Even a worm-eaten lunatic could tell that. Anyway, I think we got away with it." That's what you think," said Jan. That was chapter 20.